In 1963, a suffocating fog swallowed the San Francisco Bay, thick enough to make the air feel heavy in the lungs. It rolled in off the Pacific, a cold gray blanket that smothered the city and erased the horizon. For the men standing on the deck of the ferry cutting through the chop, the fog was just weather. But for the man standing at the stern, looking back at the vanishing silhouette of Alcatraz Island, the fog was a mercy. It was the only thing that could scrub the image of that rock from his mind. Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson stood perfectly still, his hands resting on the railing, the damp air clinging to his overcoat. He was a free man. The papers had been signed, the gate had clanged shut behind him, and the warden had given him a lecture on becoming a productive member of society. Bumpy hadn't listened to a word. He was listening to the ghost of his own stomach growling. 5 years. That was the sentence on paper. But time inside Alcatraz didn't move in years. It moved in meals, or rather the lack of them. Bumpy Johnson, the king of Harlem, the man who had dined with dukes and movie stars, had spent the last 60 months learning the true definition of hunger. Wasn't just an empty belly. It was a physical pain, a sharp gnawing rat that lived inside your ribcage and tried to chew its way out. And it wasn't an accident. It was policy. He closed his eyes, and for a second he wasn't on the boat. He was back in the hole, DB block solitary confinement. The darkness was absolute. He could smell the damp concrete and the unwashed bucket in the corner. He could hear the heavy footsteps of the guard coming down the corridor. Clump, clump, clump. The footsteps stopped. The slot in the steel door slid open. A beam of light cut through the dark, blinding him. And then the voice, "Dinner time, boy." It was Lieutenant Graves. They called him Bulldog because of his jowls and the way he never let go once he bit you. Graves didn't just hate inmates. He hated Bumpy specifically. He hated that Bumpy walked with his head up. He hated that Bumpy read philosophy books. He hated that even in a cage, Bumpy Johnson acted like a free man. So Graves had decided to break him the way you break a wild horse by starving the spirit out of him. In the memory, Bumpy crawled toward the door, his body weak, his hands shaking. Graves held a tray. It was simple food, stale bread, a piece of gristle, watery soup. But to a starving man, it was a feast. Graves would slide it through the slot, and just as Bumpy reached for it, Graves would accidentally drop it. The soup would splatter on the filthy floor. The bread would land in the waste bucket. "Oops," Graves would say, his voice dripping with mock sympathy. "Clumsy me. Better luck tomorrow, Johnson." And then the slot would slam shut, leaving Bumpy in the dark with the smell of the food he couldn't eat. Bumpy opened his eyes on the boat. His hands were gripping the railing so hard his knuckles were white. The hunger was gone now. He had eaten a breakfast of eggs and bacon before leaving the processing center, but the rage remained. It sat in his chest, heavy and cold, like a stone that would never dissolve. Most men left prison just wanting to go home. They wanted to see their wives, kiss their kids, and forget. Bumpy wanted those things too. He missed Mame with an ache that defied description, but he couldn't go home yet. Not with this stone in his chest. A king doesn't return to his throne with a debt unpaid. If he went back to Harlem now, every time he sat down to a banquet, he would see Graves's face. Every time he drank a glass of wine, he would taste that watery soup. To truly be free, he had to balance the books. The boat docked in San Francisco. Bumpy walked down the gangplank, ignoring the few reporters who had gathered to see the release of the Harlem Godfather. He pulled his hat low, stepped into a waiting cab, and gave the driver an address that wasn't the airport. It was a motel in Oakland, a nondescript place with peeling paint and a neon sign that buzzed like an angry hornet. Bumpy checked in under the name Mr. Ellsworth. The room smelled of cheap pine cleaner and stale cigarettes. It was a palace compared to DB Luck. He sat on the bed testing the mattress. It was soft. Too soft. He would probably sleep on the floor tonight. He placed his suitcase on the small table and opened it. Inside, neatly folded, were 3 suits Mame had sent him, a fresh pair of shoes, and a thick envelope taped to the lining. Bumpy peeled the tape back and dumped the contents of the envelope onto the bedspread. It wasn't money. was information. For the last 6 months of his sentence, Bumpy had been the model prisoner. He had swept the floors, worked in the laundry, and kept his mouth shut. But his eyes and ears had been wide open. He had used his connections, the Italian inmates who respected him, the black inmates who idolized him, to build a map, not a map of the prison, but a map of the people who ran it. He knew who was sleeping with whom. He knew who had a gambling problem. And most importantly, he knew where the guards went when they clocked out. He spread 3 photographs out on the bed. They were grainy, taken by a private investigator Bumpy had hired through a lawyer months ago. The first photo showed a man with a red nose and watery eyes, slumped on a bar stool. Officer Miller, the night shift guard, the one who watched while Graves kicked the food away. Miller wasn't evil in the way Graves was. He was weak. He was a follower who laughed at the jokes because he was too scared not to. But silence is a sin, too. Miller had watched a man starve and done nothing. The second photo showed a man with thick arms in a crew cut working on a car in a driveway. Officer Omali, the muscle. Omali liked to use his baton. He treated the inmates' ribs like xylophone keys. He had broken Bumpy's arm in 1961 for insubordination. It never healed right. It still clicked when it rained. The third photo was the centerpiece, Lieutenant Bulldog Graves. He looked older in the picture, civilian clothes instead of a uniform. He was retired now, living the good life on a pension, padded by the bribes he had taken for years. He was smiling in the photo, holding a fishing rod. That smile turned Bumpy's blood to ice. It was the smile of a man who thought he had gotten away with it. Bumpy picked up the photo of Miller. "You first," he whispered to the empty room. He waited until nightfall. The rain had started again, a relentless drumming against the window pane. Bumpy dressed slowly. He put on a dark charcoal suit, a white shirt, and a black tie. He polished his shoes until they shone like obsidian. He wasn't dressing for a fight. He was dressing for a funeral. He checked his reflection in the mirror. The face looking back was gaunt, the cheekbones sharper than they used to be, the eyes hollowed out by years of watching his back. But the weakness was gone. In its place was a razor-sharp focus. He slipped a pair of leather gloves into his pocket. No fingerprints. He didn't carry a gun. He wouldn't need one for Miller. Miller was already broken. He just didn't know it yet. Bumpy took a bus to the docks. The air here smelled of diesel and rotting fish. He found the bar easily, the Rusty Anchor. It was a dive, the kind of place where men went to drink until they forgot their names. Bumpy stepped inside. The bartender, a burly man with a tattoo of a mermaid on his forearm, looked up. He saw a black man in an expensive suit and paused. In 1963, in this part of town, that usually meant trouble. But Bumpy's eyes told the bartender that this wasn't the kind of trouble you could throw out. It was the kind of trouble you served. Bumpy scanned the room. There were 4 men at the bar. 3 were dock workers, loud and laughing. The 4th was sitting alone at the far end, staring into a glass of amber liquid. Officer Miller. He looked worse than in the photo. His skin was sallow, his shoulders slumped. He was wearing a stained jacket that had seen better days. He was muttering to himself, tracing the rim of his glass with a shaking finger. Bumpy walked over. The sound of his expensive leather shoes on the wooden floor was distinct, authoritative. He pulled out the stool next to Miller and sat down. Miller didn't look up. "This seat's taken," he slurred. "I don't think it is," Bumpy said. His voice was low, smooth, like gravel wrapped in velvet. Miller froze. His fingers stopped tracing the glass. That voice. He had heard that voice every night for 5 years. It was the voice that had quoted Dante's Inferno from the darkness of a solitary cell. It was the voice that had refused to beg. Miller turned his head slowly, his neck creaking. He squinted, his brain trying to process the impossibility of what he was seeing. "Join." "Hello, Mr. Miller," Bumpy said. He signaled the bartender. "A bottle of your best whiskey and 2 clean glasses." Miller pushed himself back against the bar, his eyes wide with panic. He looked around the room, but the dock workers were too busy arguing about baseball to notice. You can't be here. You're in Alcatraz." "Not anymore," Bumpy said. The bartender placed the bottle and glasses down. Bumpy poured a measure for himself and one for Miller. "I'm a free man, a tourist really, just visiting old friends." "We ate friends," Miller stammered, his hand inching toward the pocket of his jacket. Bumpy's hand shot out and clamped over Miller's wrist. It was a grip of iron. For a man who had been starved, Bumpy had a terrifying amount of strength. "Don't reach for that piece, Miller. You're drunk. You'll shoot your own foot off. Besides, I'm not here to hurt you. If I wanted to hurt you, I would have waited for you in the alley." Miller trembled, the fight draining out of him as quickly as it had appeared. "What do you want?" "I want to have a drink," Bumpy said, releasing his wrist. "Drink." Miller picked up the glass with shaking hands and downed it in one gulp. He coughed, wiping his mouth. "Look, Johnson, I know you're sore, but it wasn't me. It was Graves. He was the lieutenant. I just followed orders. I got a wife. I got kids." "I know," Bumpy said softly. "I know about your wife, Sarah. I know about your daughter, Jenny. She's 10, right? Goes to St. Mary's." Miller's face went pale. "You stay away from them. I have no interest in your family, Miller. I'm not a monster. That's the difference between you and me. You watched a man starve and laughed. I watched you starve your own soul and felt pity." Bumpy poured him another drink. "You see, I know something about you. I know why you drink. You drink because you remember the screams. You drink because you know that what went on in DB Block was a sin." Miller stared at the glass. Tears welled up in his bloodshot eyes. "I couldn't stop him. Graves, he's crazy. He would have fired me. He would have had me beaten up. Fear." Bumpy nodded. "Fear makes men do terrible things. But fear has a price." Bumpy reached into his inside pocket. Miller flinched again, expecting a weapon. Instead, Bumpy pulled out a folded document. He smoothed it out on the bar. It was a confession. A detailed, legally phrased admission of corruption within the Alcatraz guard staff. The smuggling ring, the brutality, the theft of prisoner funds. "What is this?" Miller asked. "This is your penance," Bumpy said. "You're going to sign this. You're going to admit to your part in the smuggling ring. You're going to name Graves as the ringleader, and then you're going to take it to the district attorney." Miller laughed a hysterical wet sound. "Are you crazy? I sign that I go to prison, I lose my pension, I lose my family." "True," Bumpy said, taking a sip of his whiskey. "But if you don't sign it, I have another envelope. This one goes to the Italian crew in North Beach, the ones you and Graves were stealing from. You were taking bribes to bring in cigarettes, but you were skimming off the top, weren't you?" Miller stopped laughing. He went dead silent. "Stealing from the mob wasn't a prison sentence. It was a death sentence. If the Italians find out," Bumpy continued calmly, "they won't put you in a cell. They'll put you in a barrel and drop you in the bay. And they won't stop with you. They'll look for your money. They'll visit Sarah. They'll visit Jenny." Miller began to sob openly now, putting his head in his hands. He was trapped. On one side, prison and disgrace. On the other, death for his entire family. "Why are you doing this?" Miller wept. "Because you took 5 years from me," Bumpy said. "I'm just taking your future. It's a fair trade." He slid a pen across the bar. "Sign it. Go to the cops. Be a witness against Graves. It's the only way you stay alive." Miller looked at the pen. His hand shook as he picked it up. He looked at Bumpy, searching for any hint of mercy. He found none. He found only the cold, hard stare of a man who had survived hell and come back to bring the fire with him. Miller signed. He signed his life away. Bumpy took the paper, folded it, and put it back in his pocket. He stood up, buttoning his jacket. "You did the right thing, Miller. Enjoy your drink. It's on me." Bumpy walked out of the bar, leaving a broken man weeping into his whiskey. The rain felt good on his face. One down. But Miller was the appetizer. The next course was going to be tougher. Oh, Ali. Bumpy spent the next day watching Ali's apartment. It was a second-floor walk up in a working-class neighborhood. Ali worked as a bouncer now at a strip club in the Tenderloin. He slept until noon, spent the afternoon at the gym, and went to work at night. He was a creature of habit and violence. Bumpy waited until Ali left for his shift at 8 p.m. He followed him to the club, watching from across the street. He saw Omali throw a drunk patron onto the sidewalk, kicking him in the ribs while he was down. Ali hadn't changed. He still liked hearing bones crunch. He still liked the power. Bumpy decided he wouldn't take Ali at the club. Too many witnesses. He would take him where he felt safest. At home. At 3 a.m., Clear's throat. Ali returned to his apartment. Bumpy watched the lights go on, then off. He waited another hour. The street was deserted. A stray cat knocked over a trash can. The only sound in silence. Bumpy moved to the back of the building. There was a fire escape. He jumped, catching the bottom rung, and pulled himself up. His ribs ached. The muscle wasn't all the way back yet, but his adrenaline masked the pain. He climbed to the second floor. The window was cracked open to let in the night air. Bumpy peered inside. Ali was asleep in a recliner in the living room, snoring loudly, a half-eaten sandwich on his chest. A baseball bat leaned against the wall next to him. Bumpy slid the window up. It squeaked. Ali snorted but didn't wake. Bumpy stepped inside. He stood over the sleeping man. He could have ended it right there. A knife to the throat, a pillow over the face. But that wasn't the plan. Ali needed to feel pain. He needed to know that physical strength meant nothing against a superior mind. Bumpy picked up the baseball bat. He weighed it in his hands. It was heavy ash wood. He tapped the bottom of Ali's boot. "Wake up, sunshine," while Maylee's eyes snapped open. For a split second he was confused. Then instinct took over. He saw the shadow standing over him and launched himself out of the chair, roaring. Who the hell? He was fast for a big man. He tackled Bumpy around the waist, driving him back against the wall. The wind was knocked out of Bumpy. Ali slammed a fist into Bumpy's side, right where the ribs had been starved thin. Pain exploded in Bumpy's chest. "You picked the wrong house, pal!" Omali shouted, drawing back his fist for a haymaker. Bumpy didn't panic. He had fought in the prison yard against men with shanks and nothing to lose. He twisted his body, driving his knee into Ali's groin. Ali grunted, his grip loosening just enough. Bumpy brought the handle of the bat down hard on Ali's collarbone. Crack. Ali screamed and staggered back, clutching his shoulder. He looked at Bumpy, his eyes adjusting to the dark. Johnson in the flesh. Bumpy wheezed, straightening his tie. "You're dead." Ali charged again, leading with his good shoulder like a linebacker. He wasn't trying to box. He was trying to crush. Bumpy sidestepped. He swung the bat low, aiming for the knee. It connected with a sickening thud. Ali's leg buckled. He went down hard, his face slamming into the floorboards. "Stay down," Bumpy said, standing over him, breathing heavily. But Ali was an animal. He grabbed Bumpy's ankle and yanked, sending Bumpy crashing to the floor. The bat skittered away. They scrambled in the dark, grappling. Omali was stronger, heavier. He got on top of Bumpy, his hands closing around Bumpy's throat. "I should have killed you in the yard," Ali spat, his thumbs digging into Bumpy's windpipe. Black spots danced in Bumpy's vision. Bumpy reached out, his hand searching the floor. His fingers brushed against something cold, a glass ashtray. He grabbed it and smashed it into the side of Omali's head. Ali roared, blood pouring from his ear, but he didn't let go. Bumpy reached again. He found the bat. With a guttural cry, he swung it upward, driving the end of it into Ali's ribs. Ali gasped, the air leaving his lungs, his grip faltering. Bumpy bucked his hips, throwing the big man off him. Bumpy scrambled to his feet. Ali tried to rise, but his knee gave out. He fell back, panting, blood streaming down his face. Bumpy kicked him in the chest, pinning him to the wall. "You remember 1961? Bumpy asked, his voice raspy. "You broke my arm because I didn't say yes, sir, fast enough." "Go to hell," Ali groaned. "I've been there," Bumpy said. "You sent me." Bumpy raised the bat. He didn't aim for the head. He aimed for the leg, the good leg. He swung with everything he had left. The sound was like a gunshot. The bone shattered. Ali's scream was primal. It tore through the apartment building, a sound of pure agony. He curled into a ball, sobbing, clutching his leg. "That's for the arm," Bumpy said. He was sweating, his chest heaving. He looked down at the man who had terrified D.B. Block. Now he was just a crying heap on a cheap rug. "In this," Bumpy said, dropping the bat onto Omali's chest. Is for the hunger. He walked to the fridge. He opened it. It was full of beer and cold cuts. Bumpy took a carton of milk and poured it onto the floor right in front of Omali's face. Then he took a package of ham and threw it into the puddle. Eat up, Ollie, Bumpy whispered. Don't let it go to waste. He climbed back out the window just as he heard pounding on the apartment door. Neighbors, police would be on the way. Bumpy limped down the fire escape, disappearing into the shadows of the alley. His side was throbbing, his throat was bruised, but he felt lighter. The debt was being paid, but the game wasn't over. As Bumpy walked back toward his motel, the sun beginning to crack the horizon, a telephone was ringing in a nice suburban house in Pacific Heights. Lieutenant Graves sat up in bed. He answered the phone. Yeah, Lieutenant, a voice whispered. It was Miller. He was calling from a payphone outside the police station moments before turning himself in. He's here. Who? Graves asked, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. Joe. Bumpy Johnson. He was at the bar. He made me sign a paper. Lieutenant, he knows about the smuggling. He knows about the money. Graves sat up straight, the blood draining from his face. You idiot. What did you do? I had to. He threatened my family. And listen, Allie, I just heard it on the scanner. An ambulance was called to his place. Massive trauma. Leg shattered. They say it looked like a sledgehammer hit him. Graves hung up the phone. His hand was trembling. He looked out the window at his manicured lawn, his rose bushes, his peaceful life. It was all a lie. The ghost had followed him home. Bumpy Johnson was coming. Graves didn't panic. He wasn't weak like Miller or stupid like Allie. He was a predator. He walked to his closet and unlocked a heavy safe. Inside wasn't just money. It was a Rolodex. Names of men who owed him favors. Dangerous men. Men who killed for a living. He dialed a number. This is Graves, he said into the receiver. I have a pest problem, a big one. I need a cleaning crew at my house tonight. And bring the heavy equipment. He hung up and walked to the kitchen. He poured himself a cup of coffee and sat at the table, placing a loaded .045 caliber pistol next to the sugar bowl. Come on, Bumpy, Graves whispered, his eyes cold and hard. Come and get your dinner. Miles away, Bumpy Johnson sat on the edge of his motel bed, icing his ribs. He looked at the third photo, the photo of Graves smiling. He struck a match and held it to the corner of the picture. He watched Graves' face curl and blacken, turning into ash. The easy part was over. Now the war began. The fog had swallowed Pacific Heights whole. It was a thick, soupy gray that muffled the sound of the distant foghorns on the Golden Gate Bridge and turned the streetlights into hazy floating islands of yellow. Inside the two-story Victorian house at the end of the cul-de-sac, Lieutenant Bulldog Graves sat in his leather armchair, a glass of scotch trembling in his hand. The house was dark, save for a single lamp on the desk. He had sent his wife to her sister's in Sacramento, telling her it was a plumbing emergency. The truth was far messier. The plumbing was fine. It was the past that was backing up. Graves checked his watch, 2:15 a.m. Silence. He wasn't alone. He had called in favors from the cleaning crew. 3 men he knew from his days shaking down the docks. They were ex-military, dishonorably discharged, who killed for cash and didn't ask questions. One was stationed in the kitchen with a shotgun. One was upstairs in the guest bedroom with a view of the street armed with a rifle. The third, a knife specialist named Carver, was prowling the backyard garden. Come on, you piece of trash, Graves whispered to the empty room. Make a move, Graves was terrified. But he was also arrogant. He believed in walls. He believed in guns. He believed that the systems of power that allowed him to starve men in Alcatraz would protect him here in his castle. He didn't understand that Bumpy Johnson didn't fight walls. He walked through them. Bumpy was already there. He had been there for an hour, crouched on the roof of the neighbor's garage, watching the house through the mist. He saw the shadow moving in the upstairs window. He saw the glow of a cigarette in the backyard bushes. He counted the men. 3 hired guns plus Graves, 4 against 1. Bumpy smiled. In Alcatraz, the odds were usually 50 guards against 1 inmate. 4 felt fair. He didn't have a gun. He had a plan. A length of piano wire he had bought at a hardware store in Oakland, and a heavy wrench he had stolen from a toolbox at the motel. But his greatest weapon was the clear's throat darkness. He knew how to live in it. These men were used to electric lights and open spaces. Bumpy had spent 30 days in a hole where he couldn't see his own hand in front of his face. He was the king of the dark. He moved. He slipped down the side of the garage, landing silently on the wet grass of the neighbor's lawn. He crawled to the fence separating the properties. Through the slats he could see Carver pacing near the rose bushes. Carver was impatient, stopping his feet to stay warm, his knife glinting every time he passed the kitchen window light. Bumpy picked up a small stone and tossed it against the side of the house away from where he was hiding. Clack! Carver spun around. "Who's there?" Silence. Carver crept toward the noise, moving away from the fence. Bumpy vaulted over the wood, landing in the soft earth of the flower bed. He moved low, a shadow detaching itself from the night. He came up behind Carver just as the man realized he had been tricked. Carver turned, raising his knife, but Bumpy was already inside his guard. Bumpy didn't use the wire yet. He used the wrench. A short, brutal chop to the wrist sent the knife flying into the hydrangeas. Carver opened his mouth to scream, but Bumpy's other hand clamped over his face, pushing his head back. Bumpy swept the man's legs, driving him into the mud. "Sleep," Bumpy whispered. He brought the wrench down on the man's temple. Not a killing blow. Bumpy wasn't a butcher, but enough to turn the lights out for a few hours. Carver went limp. Bumpy dragged him into the deep shadows of the hedges and covered him with a tarp. One down. Bumpy looked at the house. The kitchen light was the problem. It cast a pool of illumination into the yard, making approach impossible. He needed to blind them. He located the fuse box in the side of the house. It was locked with a padlock. Bumpy didn't have a key, but he had the wrench. One hard twist shattered the hasp. He opened the panel and found the main breaker. He took a breath. When he pulled this lever, the war started. Clunk. The house plunged into absolute blackness. Inside, the reaction was immediate panic. "What the hell?" shouted the man in the kitchen. "Graves, the power's out." "Shut up!" Graves yelled from the living room. He cut the line, eyes open. "He's coming." Bumpy moved to the back door. It was locked, but it was glass. He wrapped his hand in his jacket and punched through a small pane near the handle. He reached in, unlocked it, and slid the door open. The sound of the breaking glass was masked by the shout of the man upstairs running down the hallway. Bumpy stepped into the kitchen. He could smell the fear. It smelled like sweat and stale tobacco. He crouched behind the center island. The kitchen gunman, a heavy-set brute named Miller, no relation to the guard, was fumbling with a lighter. The flame sparked, illuminating his terrified face for a split second. Flick light, flick dark. In the dark, Bumpy moved. He slid across the linoleum floor in his socks, silent as a ghost. When the lighter sparked again, Bumpy was standing right next to him. Miller yelped and swung the shotgun wild. The blast roared in the confined space, blowing a hole in the refrigerator door. Milk and glass sprayed everywhere. The flash blinded Miller, but Bumpy had closed his eyes right before the trigger pull. Bumpy grabbed the hot barrel of the shotgun, twisting it upward. He drove his knee into Miller's stomach, doubling him over. Then he looped the piano wire around Miller's neck. He didn't pull to kill. He pulled to control. He tightened it just enough to cut off the air. Miller gagged, dropping the gun, clawing at his throat. "Shh," Bumpy hissed in his ear. "Be quiet or I pull harder." He dragged the gasping man to the pantry and shoved him inside, wedging a chair under the doorknob. Miller kicked and thumped from the inside, but he wasn't getting out. Two down. Miller, Carver. Graves screamed from the living room. "Report." No answer. Just the sound of the rain and the thumping from the pantry. "He's in the house." Graves shrieked. "Richards, get down here." Richards, the rifleman upstairs, came thundering down the stairs, his flashlight beaming wildly. He was the professional of the group. He didn't rush. He swept the beam methodically. Bumpy was in the hallway, pressed flat against the wall behind a grandfather clock. He watched the beam of light cut through the dust mows. Richards reached the bottom of the stairs. He swept the light left toward the living room, then right toward the kitchen. He saw the open pantry door. He saw the shattered fridge. Clear the kitchen, Richards muttered to himself, swinging the rifle toward the mess. Bumpy stepped out from behind the clock. He was behind Richards. He tapped the man on the shoulder. Richards spun around, bringing the rifle butt up for a smash. He was fast, but Bumpy had spent 5 years boxing shadows in a cell. He ducked under the swing, slipping inside the arc. He punched Richards in the solar plexus, a short, devastating jab that emptied the man's lungs. Richards folded. Bumpy grabbed the man's head and slammed it against the wall. The drywall cracked. Richards slid down to the floor, unconscious. Bumpy picked up the flashlight. He clicked it off. He didn't need it. Now it was just the two of them. Bumpy walked toward the living room. Graves was there, huddled behind his desk, his pistol pointed at the doorway. He was breathing hard, wheezing like a broken accordion. "I know you're there, Johnson," Graves yelled, his voice cracking. "I have a gun. You come through that door, I'll blow your head off. You had a gun in DB block, too." Bumpy's voice floated out of the darkness, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere. "It didn't save you then. It won't save you now." "I was doing my job," Graves pleaded, the bravado crumbling. "You were a criminal. You deserved it." "I was a man," Bumpy said, "and you tried to turn me into an animal. But you forgot one thing, Lieutenant. Animals hold grudges." Bumpy threw the wrench into the room. It clattered loudly against the hardwood floor to the left. Graves panicked. He fired 3 shots at the sound. Bang, bang, bang! The muzzle flashes strobed the room like lightning, revealing Graves's face, sweaty, pale, eyes wide with terror. Bumpy moved during the shots. He dove low, rolling into the room on the right side. He came up behind the leather armchair. 3 shots, Bumpy said calmly from the darkness. "You have 4 left in that clip, Lieutenant, unless you're shaking too much to count." "Show yourself," Graves screamed, spinning the chair around. "You like the dark, don't you?" Bumpy asked. "You kept me in it for 30 days. You said it was good for the soul. Let's see how your soul is doing." Bumpy grabbed a heavy glass decanter from the side table and hurled it. It smashed against the wall behind Graves. Graves spun and fired again. "Bang, bang, 2 left," Bumpy counted. Graves was hyperventilating now. He was spinning in circles, pointing the gun at shadows. "Where are you? Fight me like a man." "I am fighting you like a man," Bumpy said, standing up slowly from behind the chair. "The man you made." Graves saw the silhouette rising. He aimed. He pulled the trigger. Click. Graves stared at the gun. He had miscounted. Or maybe his shaking hands had jammed it. It didn't matter. The weapon was useless. Bumpy walked into the faint light coming from the window. He looked massive in the gloom, a vengeful spirit in a charcoal suit. Graves dropped the gun and scrambled backward, knocking over his chair. He crawled toward the fireplace, grabbing a poker. "Stay back!" Graves shrieked. Bumpy didn't stop. He walked right up to the poker. Graves swung it. Bumpy caught it in his gloved hand. He didn't even flinch. He wrenched it out of Graves' grip and tossed it across the room. Bumpy reached down and grabbed Graves by the lapels of his expensive smoking jacket. He lifted the man off his feet effortlessly. Graves kicked and flailed, his feet dangling inches off the floor. "Please," Graves sobbed, the tears finally coming. "Please, Johnson, I'll give you money. I have a safe full of cash. Take it. Just leave." "I don't want your money," Bumpy said, bringing his face close to Graves. "I want your dignity," Bumpy threw him. Graves flew across the room and crashed through the French doors leading to the garden. Glass shattered again. Graves landed in the wet mud of his prize-winning rose garden, gasping snorts and clears throat for air. Bumpy stepped through the broken frame, stepping onto the grass. The rain was falling harder now, washing the blood from the cuts on Graves' face. "Get up," Bumpy ordered. Graves scrambled to his feet, trying to run toward the gate. Bumpy cut him off, shoving him back toward the center of the yard. "Where are you going, Lieutenant? We have work to do." Bumpy walked to the shed near the fence. He kicked the door open and emerged a moment later carrying a shovel. He tossed it at Graves's feet. It landed with a wet thud in the mud. "Pick it up," Bumpy said. "What?" Graves trembled, looking at the shovel, then at Bumpy. You're going to kill me. You're going to make me dig my own grave." "Maybe," Bumpy said. Depends on how fast you dig. I can't, Graves wailed. It's raining. I'm an old man. You weren't old when you watched me eat bugs off the floor, Bumpy said, his voice dropping to a growl. Dig. Graves looked at the house. No help coming. He looked at the neighbors, dark windows. He looked at Bumpy, death waiting. He picked up the shovel. He began to dig. The soil was heavy and wet. Graves was soft. His muscles atrophied by years of desk work and easy living. He groaned with every scoop. The rain plastered his hair to his skull. His silk pajamas were soaked through, clinging to his shivering frame. Bumpy watched him. He stood perfectly still, rain dripping from the brim of his hat. He wasn't enjoying this. There was no joy in it. It was simply necessary. It was a transaction. You take a man's humanity, you pay with your own. 10 minutes passed. Graves was shin deep. He stopped, leaning on the handle, wheezing. Keep going, Bumpy said. Please, Graves gasped. My heart, I can't. My ribs poked through my skin, Bumpy said. I couldn't stand up. You kicked me to make me move. Dig. Graves sobbed and kept digging. 20 minutes knee-deep, 30 minutes thigh-deep. Graves fell to his knees in the mud, vomiting from exhaustion. Kill me, he whispered. Just do it. I can't do this anymore. Bumpy walked to the edge of the hole. He looked down at the man who had been the god of his world for 5 years. The bulldog, the terror of DB Lock. Now he was just a pathetic, mud-covered old man crying in a hole in the ground. Bumpy felt the rage finally begin to drain away. It was replaced by a profound disgust. This was the man he had feared. This weak, hollow shell. Stand up, Bumpy said. Graves struggled to his feet, swaying. Is this it? Is this where you shoot me? I told you, Bumpy said. I don't have a gun. Bumpy looked around the yard. He saw a heavy stone bird bath. He walked over to it and tipped the top basin off. It was a heavy concrete disc. He rolled it over to the hole. You like the hole, Lieutenant? Bumpy said. You told me it gives a man time to think, time to reflect on his sins. No. Graves realized what was happening. No, Johnson, don't leave me in here. It's cold. I'll freeze. You won't freeze, Bumpy said. It's California. You'll just be uncomfortable, hungry, thirsty, afraid. Bumpy shoved Graves down. Graves scrambled, trying to climb out, but the mud was slick. He slipped back down. Don't do this, Graves screamed. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for the food. I'm sorry for everything. I believe you, Bumpy said. Now, Bumpy slid the heavy concrete basin over the opening of the hole. It didn't seal it completely. There were gaps for air, but it was too heavy for Graves to lift from below, especially without leverage. It trapped him in the darkness. Johnson. Graves' voice was muffled now, echoing up from the earth. Johnson, help. Bumpy stood on top of the stone. He could hear Graves scratching at the dirt, crying, begging. It sounded exactly like the inmates in DB Block. I called the police from your kitchen phone, Bumpy said, speaking to the ground. I told them there was a disturbance. They'll be here in 10 minutes, maybe 20. Until then, you're in solitary. Don't leave me. Goodbye, Bulldog, Bumpy whispered. He walked away. He stepped over the unconscious body of Carver in the bushes. He hopped the fence. He walked down the quiet, foggy street, leaving the house of horrors behind him. Behind him, the muffled screams of Lieutenant Graves continued, a ghost haunting his own garden. When the police arrived, they would find a scene of madness. 3 unconscious hitmen tied up in the house, and the homeowner, the respected Lieutenant Graves, buried in his own backyard, screaming about a demon named Bumpy Johnson. His career would be over, his reputation shattered. He would be the laughing stock of the department, and every time he closed his eyes for the rest of his life, he would feel the weight of the earth pressing in on him. Bumpy walked for miles. He walked until the sun began to burn through the fog. He found a diner near the train station that was just opening. He went inside and sat at the counter. Coffee, Bumpy said, and pancakes, 3 stacks. The waitress poured him a cup. Hungry morning, hun. Bumpy looked at the steam rising from the cup. He took a deep breath. For the first time in 5 years, the rat in his chest was quiet. The stone was gone. Starving. Bumpy smiled. but I think I'm finally ready to eat." He ate slowly, tasting the syrup, the butter, the coffee. It was the best meal of his life. Not because the food was good, but because it tasted like freedom. 2 days later, the train pulled into Grand Central Station, New York City. The noise hit him first. The honking, the shouting, the rhythm of the greatest city on earth. Bumpy stepped onto the platform, his suitcase in hand. He took a deep breath of the grimy gasoline-scented air. It smelled like home. He took a cab uptown. As the car crossed 110th Street, entering Harlem, Bumpy felt his shoulders relax. The buildings were taller, the sidewalks crowded with his people. He saw the corner boys running numbers. He saw the jazz clubs getting ready for the night. He saw the kingdom he had built waiting for him. The cab pulled up in front of the Lenox Terrace apartments. Bumpy paid the driver and stepped out. He smoothed his suit. He adjusted his hat. He looked up at the third-floor window. The light was on. He walked into the lobby. The doorman, an old friend named Pops, looked up from his newspaper. His jaw dropped. "Mr. Johnson," Pop stammered. Is that you?" "It's me, Pops," Bumpy said. "I'm back, Lord have mercy. We heard rumors, but wait until Mrs. Johnson sees you." Bumpy took the elevator up. The ride felt like it took a lifetime. The doors opened. He walked down the hall to apartment 3B. He stood in front of the door. He raised his hand to knock, but hesitated. His hand was trembling slightly, not from fear. From love, he knocked. 3 sharp raps the code. Silence. Then footsteps, rapid clicking heels on the parquet floor. The lock turned. The door swung open. Mame Johnson stood there. She was wearing a housecoat, her hair wrapped in a silk scarf. She looked older. Tired. Lines of worry etched around her eyes. But when she saw him, 10 years melted away. Her hands flew to her mouth. Tears spilled instantly, running down her cheeks. "Bumpy," she whispered. "Hello, Queen," Bumpy said, his voice thick with emotion. She threw herself at him. Bumpy caught her, burying his face in her neck, inhaling the scent of her perfume. It was the only thing that had kept him sane in the dark. He held her tight, lifting her off her feet, spinning her around in the hallway. "You're home?" she sobbed. "You're really home." "I'm home, ma'am," Bumpy said, setting her down, but not letting go. "And I ain't leaving again." She pulled back, looking at his face, tracing the new scars, the hollows of his cheeks. She saw the hunger damage, but she also saw the fire in his eyes. She saw that he hadn't come back broken. He had come back hardened. "Are you okay?" she asked. Did they hurt you?" Bumpy looked past her into the warm, lit apartment. He thought of Miller signing the confession. He thought of Ali's shattered leg. He thought of Graves screaming in the hole. "They tried," Bumpy said, "but I settled the tab." He walked inside and closed the door. The world outside, the police, the Italians, the enemies would be waiting for him tomorrow. There would be wars to fight. There would be young punks who thought they could take his crown. There would be new kingpins trying to muscle in on the heroin trade. But that was tomorrow. Tonight, the king was home. Bumpy walked to the kitchen. Mame was already bustling, pulling leftovers from the fridge, wiping her eyes. "I'll make you something. You look too thin, Bumpy. We need to get some meat on those bones." Bumpy sat at the table. He watched her move. He watched the city lights twinkling through the window. He put his hands on the table. They were steady. The guards at Alcatraz had tried to starve him to death. They thought that by taking his food they could take his power. They were wrong. Hunger didn't kill Bumpy Johnson. It sharpened him. It burned away the fat and the doubt, leaving only the steel underneath. "Mommy?" Bumpy asked. "Yes, baby. Make it a big plate." Bumpy grinned, the old dangerous glint returning to his eyes. "I got a lot of work to do." As he sat there listening to the sounds of his wife cooking and the distant hum of Harlem below, Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson made a silent vow. He would never be hungry again. And anyone who tried to take from his plate, well, they could ask Bulldog Graves what happens when you starve a lion. And first subscribe to the channel. The legend was back, and the feast was just beginning. Thanks for listening, folks.